Welcome to the Winning Edge podcast, where we share focus, fueling, and faith-filled stories and strategies to give young athletes the tools they need to become the best versions of themselves as athletes and individuals.
What you eat and how you think can transform your athletic performance and overall well-being. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or fitness enthusiast looking to gain that mental edge and optimize your health, this podcast is for you. We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, coach, educator, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom of 2 young athletes.
And I'm Stacy, registered dietitian and also a mom of 2 young athletes. Today on the show, we're joined by someone whose journey through sports and adversity and science is nothing short of inspiring. Jessica Beal grew up as a multi-sport athlete, excelling in volleyball, soccer, softball, earning multiple varsity letters, and even as team captain with honors along the way. But her senior year brought unexpected challenges. A dislocated ankle, 7 games into her volleyball season, undermined her ability to be able to play. But she came back and made a remarkable comeback, returning for the All-Star game and earning MVP honors in her only appearance that year. Jessica's athletic ambitions took her to the collegiate level, where she started as a freshman on a Division I volleyball team. But behind the scenes, the pressures of performance and body image led her into a difficult struggle with an eating disorder. Compounded by the demands of medication just to stay in the game, she made the courageous decision to step away from competitive collegiate sports. That turning point led her into a new passion: pharmacy, guided by mentors who understood both the science and the athlete's mindset. While in pharmacy school, she discovered CrossFit, where soon she involved a love for Olympic weightlifting, which you guys know I love. Now, as a pharmacist and competitive athlete, Jessica is determined and dedicated to helping others understand their bodies, their medications, and how to truly support health from the inside out. Her story is one of resilience, reinvention, and a relentless pursuit of both performance and well-being. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here today. And I'm
excited to talk with you. You have such a fascinating background. And I know in connecting for the show, we had so much to talk about, whether it's just your background. Mm-hmm. Lindsay, I think you guys had a lot in common from playing collegiate sports.
The sports, the nutrition, yes.
So I would love for you, we told our athletes, I think, a little bit about your background. And one of the things that I'd love to just kind of touch on first that we really shared in your intro is talk about being a collegiate D1 athlete and the information that you received from coaches around nutrition, like what fueled your passion for talking about some of the things that you do today?
Yeah. So I think I think it's every a lot of high school kids' dreams is to play in college. And I always wanted that. Like, I'm definitely type A, so this probably is not shocking to anybody. So I was like, I'm going to go play Division I. And when I got multiple scholarship offers, I, visited the schools. I felt at home at the school I chose. And I didn't know even at the time to ask about resources that schools would offer for athletes. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't know to ask, do you have sports psychology? Do you have sports nutrition? And I think some of the issue in my situation was there wasn't those additional services or athlete support personnel there to help the athlete. We had trainers, we had coaches, but the information I was given was through a coach who didn't have a nutrition background, who I found out later actually had an eating disorder and kind of put it on us. We were being weighed in once a week, every Monday, and told, if our weight changed at all, we needed to run more. Even now, looking back science-wise, like as a female athlete, your weight is going to fluctuate with hormones and times of the cycle. And, that was never addressed or accounted for. And so I think all those, plus the pressures I put on myself to succeed and to kind of people please, made me vulnerable to that cycle of disordered eating, because that's what was kind of put on me, and I didn't have the support there. And when they gave me medications, I didn't know what to ask. I mean, I was thousands of miles away from my parents. At this point, we didn't have Zoom calls. We didn't have all the fun stuff. I'm old. And so, some of that I didn't know the questions to ask, like, what are the side effects? So you give someone with an eating disorder an antidepressant that I now know as a pharmacist has a high risk of weight gain. It is just a complex for error
what a
issues.
cycle.
And I didn't have sports psychology on board, so I was just told to go back and play. So I think it was a struggle. And there was a lot of looking back, these pieces that I'm like, that would be helpful to have had as an athlete. That would have been helpful to know as an athlete. And I think I wouldn't have gone down this path I mean, while I'm not happy I went down the path, I hope that my story helps somebody that now listening may be like, oh, maybe I should ask what resources do they have for athletes as far as nutrition, sports psychology, pharmacy, physicians on site.
I think you bring up a really great point because, you know, even at my college, we didn't have any resources to help us.
Mm-mm.
We didn't have someone who even checked in to see if your practice schedule aligned with the times that the cafeteria was open for you to use your meal plan. So you miss meals or you're eating the wrong things and nobody's really checking on you on that. And now that I've learned so much through Stacy with, you know, nutrition is individualized, there should be a nutritionist working with every athlete at that level to tailor to meet their needs of their body.
Well, and in schools that are really intentional, and you probably know this, Jessica, you've seen this, is they are individualizing nutrition plans for each and every one of their athletes. They're not
now
one size fits all. Yes.
Correct. But then not every athlete gets that. I mean, you're looking at like the Power 5 schools and some of those, but you know, Division 2, Division 3, where we still have high achieving, very impressive athletes, and they still don't have those resources. And I think, you know, some of it, like I think we talked about beforehand, was like, it's a skill you need to learn, nutrition, and it changes throughout your life, but we've never given those, sometimes not even understand it as a kid. Sometimes it's not for our parents' fault, but our parents don't understand it because they were never given the education either. And finding quality resources can be challenging with so much information out there.
You mean we shouldn't go find our information on TikTok, or we shouldn't Google it?
Correct.
Oh, Google.
Correct.
I love that. And I love that you share that. And you're after my own heart, because I think we have scope of practice and specialties, because each of these people spends years. I'm not a pharmacist, so I don't know what you know, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you about some pharmacy things today. I'm also not a psychologist. You know, my specialty is nutrition, but you need all of these specialties the same way that if you're thinking about taking care of your health, you need a cardiovascular surgeon if it comes down to something with your heart versus a general, you know, medical practitioner. And so I think we don't talk about this enough to parents and coaches, and there's not the use of these experts to really fuel our athletes well. So then you told a story earlier, and I had to laugh about this, which is like, you were talking about a young athlete, and I want to talk about NSAIDs for a little bit. So ibuprofen, some of the medications we take, and I want to touch on this one, especially because we talk to a lot of parents of young athletes, and athletes are now practicing working out year round. And there's a lot of talk about this and kind of the story that you told of like not approaching it from a lifestyle perspective, but then using a medication to sort of almost like a crutch to keep the athlete going.
So I think, you know, obviously NSAID. So for those listening, that's ibuprofen, naproxen, so Aleve and Advil. Sorry, my brain was not working yet this morning.
Okay, it's early.
And so those are your over-the-counter anti-inflammatories that we're talking about. And I think because they're so ease of access, people think, one, they're over-the-counter, so they must be safe no matter how much I take. I mean, there's not really risk. And I think, as you spoke to, we're seeing athletes younger and younger specialize sooner. They're now practicing the same sport year round and multiple times. So they're using repetitive motion. So we're starting to see a lot of athletes have earlier injuries that we used to see in like collegiate and professional. I think the big one which is really interesting, is Tommy John surgery. So the elbow surgery for pitchers, the average age now is between 15 and 17. And it used to be something you would see in the pros. So it's just speaking to this overuse. But I think a lot of people turn to NSAIDs when they are truly like overuse or underdeveloped. So at 15 or 17, you shouldn't be throwing all these pitches. You shouldn't be doing all this movement. You need to be out playing and learning to do stuff in different directions. And so we're starting to see these overuse. And a lot of people turn to NSAIDs because they're easy to access and they mask the pain so they can continue to play, continue to practice, instead of pausing and looking at like, hey, we may need to actually, instead of more reps, step back. So I was telling a story about, you know, an athlete who wasn't playing so well. And so they kept putting ibuprofen on and this and that. And so the athlete, it happened with Benadryl, so antihistamines too. I've seen this, but it happens with NSAIDs a lot, is that the athlete, you know, starts to perform poorer and they start looking at it going, they must not be training enough, or they need more practice. They need to condition more. They need to do that. When in reality, we really probably need that athlete to pause. It's okay to rest. It's okay to
adult
recover.
Athletes rest, Jessica. It's
a
crazy.
4-letter word.
I see so many young athletes, and there's like, there's a lot of pressure and a lack of empathy for allowing our children to rest.
Yeah,
But
I
our
agree with
elite
that.
athletes are resting.
I know if you look at elite athletes, some are training 4 days a week. I mean, some of the off days are yoga and body work and maybe physical therapy, but they're very intentional on those days, and they're shorter training cycles because they know if we get into the science behind it, your body has to rest in order to rebuild. And if we're constantly tearing it down, which is what happens during practice, we get micro tears, we get, a lot of inflammatory hormones, a lot of stuff that goes on chemically. If we don't allow that to rest, that continues to burn inside and causes inflammation, which causes injury. So I think in high school and college, we see a lot, especially high school, I see they're trying to get to the next level. So they're practicing, they're having privates, they're doing this, they're trying to do all the things, when in reality, sometimes doing less is probably going to do more, and you're going to have a much more resilient and well-balanced athlete. And as they get older in life, that'll be amazing.
I was going to say, even listening to your body, and I have to touch on this really quickly because this is the biggest thing I will tell my kiddos. My oldest one, when he wants to reach for ibuprofen because he's got a headache, my first thing is, are you hydrated well?
Yes.
Because 9 times out of 10, when you have a really bad headache, that is your body talking to you saying, hey, I need X, Y, Z.
Yes.
And so I love that we talked about this a little bit of like doing a better job at allowing our athletes to truly listen to their bodies. And what is your body telling you? Does your body need rest? Does your body need hydration? Does your body need sleep?
Yes.
So,
well, and I was going to say, I remember distinctly, like I was a one athlete, a one sport athlete, early on, sixth grade. It was basketball from then on, and I played year round, but I didn't play, like, when there's like the crossover for seasons and kids are playing multiple sports. And so they're playing, football and fall baseball at the same time. I was never allowed to do that. My mom made me actually have time. So I would have a lot of rest, which was really impressive, actually. I'm going to have to let Mel, like, hey, you
Go
did that
mom.
right. Go mom. But I do the same thing with my kids. So when it's, in between seasons for him and he has a month off, I'm like, you don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to go in the garage and you don't have to practice all the time. You can do just,
Go play.
your body, like body weight training, right? Like do your push-ups, do your sit-ups, work out, run, but it doesn't have to be constant. Like you're still young, and I think a lot of parents I hear, they're like, we don't want off time. They're gonna burn out. They're gonna get hurt. Like they have to have rest.
Well, and I think you mentioned something too, Jessica, that I part of why we started doing this is because in my everyday job that I've done for the past 11 years, I see a lot of adults. And when you think about inflammation happening, these micro tears, the inflammation that's happening in young children because of stress, those things are markers for long-term health opportunity and potentially disease risk.
Yes.
Chronic disease risk, we know now more than ever, is caused by chronic periods of inflammation. And so I don't think we think about that enough as parents or talk about that. And you would never want to be positioning your child to have cardiovascular disease at a younger age. You'd never want to be positioning them to have diabetes or obesity or these chronic diseases that they're going to have to manage for a lifetime. But we're so passionate about, this sport, this thing right now, that I don't even know sometimes that we think about the unintended consequences of our actions and pressuring these young kids to do things that maybe aren't the best for their long-term health.
Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot of that, of missing the longer term goals or the longer term gains. They see I just want to get to college, but you're setting, I think we talked about this a little bit about like disordered eating, like, some of the stuff you're seeing in high school and college, it plays into later in life too. So if you can't, I've seen it in a lot of like my weight class sports, like my high school boys that are cutting for wrestling is the ones I've seen it. Have seen it in, and that was just a space I was in, but they're making these dramatic weight cuts in high school. And then they get this not a great relationship with food. They're like, I can cut weight if I need to. And when they get 20 or 30, they can't do that anymore. And then they don't know how to listen to their body and how to eat correctly. And then they set in for this like weight gain. And then you start seeing metabolic syndrome. And you're like, this started years ago with not being able to trust your body and have that skill of nutrition and sleep and relationship with food. And I think like you spoke to also with inflammation, and we don't really know. We know that it's the driver of so many chronic conditions, and how long years before those develop, are we starting to have that inflammation? And it's just like this, I always tell people, it's kind of like a little fire smoldering, and you never know when that's actually going to catch fire and light, but it could be 5 or 10 years of not great habits. And then it later a little bit later is like starts to burn really big.
Well, and you're speaking to my heart, because this is a space where, and also being a certified diabetes educator for several years, what we don't realize when we're cutting or starving ourselves is our body is compensating. So gluconeogenesis is happening. We're pumping out insulin. Managing insulin levels, we now know, is one of the most important factors for how we think about long-term health. So these, very much these young male athletes are like, oh, I'm just cutting or I'm just getting lean for my sport. But your body is doing things chemically on the inside to compensate for that. That then puts you more at risk for long-term health. We actually had a great Dallas dietitian, Hannah Ibwagu, who is with Equipped Wellness, and she does a lot of professional athletes coaching for cutting, for, weight-based sports. And she's like, it's a very interesting space where people can have a very disordered approach to how they think about food, which impacts them forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so talk a little bit about creatine. That's a supplement we talk about a lot with our athletes. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
I really love it. And I think some of the science is really interesting behind it, but I would love to hear your thoughts on creatine.
I really like creatine.
Me too.
Obviously, there's caveats. Some people don't tolerate it well. There are some people that, kidney stones, if you're a former, you may not be the great, making sure we go back to, you have to be hydrated to take it. But I think there's a lot of really interesting science, especially in the female space, and so many benefits for women using creatine. And we've seen it for years studied in males and like bodybuilding, but the science with it for even like post like strokes and traumatic brain injuries and concussions is so cool that's coming out. I was recently reading an article and I found this really interesting. They actually they used creatine for women with depression, and it actually helped. And they found that if you are a woman and you need an antidepressant, adding creatine to that antidepressant when you start it may actually impact and make the drug start to work sooner. They were looking at scales and found that it had like a 6-week earlier onset to improving depression numbers. So I thought that was really interesting. So I think the science behind creatine is interesting. I think the question I get the most is, when can I take it? Like, when should I start taking it? My usual answer is, if you're doing competitive sport or you're weight training, it's probably a good time to start taking it. Usually it's around 16 is about when I see most start, but you don't have to do the loading doses. I don't think that is necessary. And a lot of people don't tolerate it with that, but even as small as like a 3-gram dose for some people. I mean, I put my mom on it because she's 78 and I was like, we need you to have muscle, lady.
Well, and too, have you seen the recent research around creatine and cognition?
Yes.
So in Alzheimer's disease, it's fascinating to me.
I think it's so cool. I mean, if you really go back to biology 101 and the creatine kinase system and like how your body does energy, it is the quickest system in your body to produce energy, and your brain needs the most of it. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Whether that's the creatine, that's acting to fuel that system that then boost, energy to the brain, or whether, to your point, it's fueling muscle building, which is, all this goes back to the science of what we learned in OChem, right?
Yeah, my fave. I actually have an undergrad in organic chemistry.
Oh, okay. Girl, now I will say I love it, but I had a love-hate relationship with organic chemistry, if I'm honest with you. It's one of those where it's fascinating, but you're also like, oh my gosh, my brain's going to explode.
I did organic chemistry and bioorganic chemistry in my undergrad as my major. And so I love like that. And I think that's what drove me into pharmacy, because I was like, it's not the medications, and like, not every pharmacist is just going to push medications, but it's the science behind like how systems work, and where do medications work in those systems, and what does that side effect cause, or how can we work to improve that system, and receptors and hormones. I could geek out about hormones.
Okay, that's why you became a pharmacist and I became a dietitian, because I was like, oh, that's my turning point, where if I have to do OChem for the rest of my life, I can't handle it. Like,
bring it on.
Now, biochemistry was fun because it's more like metabolism and the body and all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
So as someone who's not in that world.
And she's like, y'all stop geeking out too much.
No, I love it though, because I learned so much. I love it because I'm learning all the things, and then I go home and I apply it, right? I apply it how it fits for my own children and for myself. But you said something about creatine for your mom and helping with the cognitive approach. And I want to know more about that, because I think that,
you're like, how much should I take?
Well, no, just even for my parents, for me, for, like what do you recommend? Like, what type of creatine or what brand of creatine are you using for your mom? Like, how does that?
So I recommend, so most people find 3 to 5, most of the studies, unless there's some small nuances like post-concussion, if you weren't using creatine before and you're using it now, you may need a higher loading dose. But in general, most people 3 to 5 grams of creatine per day. I am a full proponent of good old creatine monohydrate, which is the one that has most of the research, almost 90% of the research behind it. There are new fancy ones out there that are chemically slightly different or absorb easier. They're just a lot more money most of the time. Not really worth it. They don't have all the research. The other thing is I always look for a third-party tested supplement. So that is the big thing when I'm looking at supplements, because the world is so unregulated and anybody could put anything in a bottle. I'm making sure I look for a supplement that has a seal on the outside that says third-party tested. And usually that's like NSF, Informed Choice, Informed Sport, USP, and then there's another one that I always forget the letters. It's BS, and it's a gold one, batch tested, and it's more international that you see that one. But I'm making sure that I'm looking for that as a seal of knowing that what's in that product is what is in that product, and there's nothing else in that product, and it's the right amount, because there's so much with supplements and regular.
I think that this is so important because as someone, and like most of American families, we don't have this knowledge. And you see stuff advertised, like how many people are buying on, like, what is it? The TikTok shop. You know, you see someone promoting a product and then you're like, ooh, people order it without really knowing. So I think this information is so crucial so that people are using the right type of products.
Well, we talk about this a lot, but I love it coming from you as a pharmacist, Jessica, because I think, I tell our athletes all the time, at minimum, look for NSF. And I just kind of use that one because it's simple and it's third-party tested. And it doesn't say that. What you really are then accepting when you're buying any sort of supplement, and these supplements in the grocery store are they're over by the, over-the-counter drug area. All of those are supplements. A lot of things you're finding in sort of like healthy living areas or these like vitamin areas they're not well regulated. So what you're doing as a parent, if you're giving these things to your child that aren't third-party verified or taking them yourself, is trusting that the person who's selling you something is actually making sure that when they're making a profit off of you, they're giving you what they're saying they're giving you. And that doesn't always happen. And
it's very as someone who is uninformed on it to go and make a decision and then wonder, what am I putting in my kid's body or what am I giving to my family member?
I think, there was a study during COVID that came out on melatonin, because melatonin was highly recommended during the COVID phase. And they came out and they tested, I don't recall the numbers of over-the-counter products. They just pulled melatonin off the shelf. Some of them were at like 20% of what the label said, and some were as much as 400% over what was on the label. And I'm like, you thought you were giving somebody 5 milligrams and you're really giving them like 300 milligrams. That is a dose that you're going to feel horrible on. There's going to be all types of side effects. And it's just because these products are so unregulated and inconsistent. And there's two things that you guys made me think of was, one, a lot of these they're here to make a profit and they're marketing. So they're marketers first, and their job is to sell, not to make sure that the product is effective, that it has the right effective dose, because the serving size on the back of the label may not be what research shows is actually effective. I see that often. They'll be like, it contains vitamin C and it contains like 50 milligrams, and you really need like 1,000 milligrams to be effective, or ashwagandha. All the time I see
Jessica,
that.
why I would advocate, if you're a marketer and you're listening to this, or you need to be working with sports pharmacists, sports dietitians, like, guys, when is enough going to be enough that we stop letting TikTok content creators sell us stuff? Because to your point, Jessica, what these people are doing is they're making a profit off of marketing something to young individuals, to adults. And they're also not, as a content creator, validating.
Correct.
As a dietitian, if I were ever to take funds from someone, like, I would make sure that what I was passing on to my audience. But what's so funny to me is because you put hashtag sponsored or whatever, and you're being transparent, people think, oh, of course you're going to say this because it's sponsored. But I'm like, someone else is selling this to you. They're not being transparent and telling you it's sponsored. And number two, they probably haven't done any research to validate that the product is actually good. But it's almost like, they're more skeptical of the credentialed experts than they are of like the TikTok content creator.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see that more and more as you've started to see like NIL and all of the branding behind, the athletes in college, and now high school athletes can get paid for sponsorships and things like that.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see more and more of that out there. And I think as an athlete, that's something you might want to consider. Like, yes, they're paying you money, but do you want to promote a product that may be not safe, that may not be effective, that some little kid is looking up to you? And they're looking up to you because of what you've worked for and what you've done. And you're saying you should use this, but you haven't done your research. And I think, I think that's really scary for me, is that there's a lot of that NIL and the sponsorship coming out, and kids are looking up to you and you're like, I'm going to take that because he says so. And did you do your research before you said yes to that?
Oh, there's a creator that I follow, and she was a D2 athlete, and she gives all of this nutrition misinformation is what I would say. And I just kind of listened to be like,
send it to me.
I sent it to Lindsay, and I'm like,
this.
that's scary because people are following her. Number one, she's attractive. Number two, because she played a D2 sport, people look up to her. She's giving advice on nutrition and mindset, things that are not in her scope of practice. And that's really scary. But yeah, I think we've got a lot of work cut out for us to get in front of and to translate the science. I think, Jessica, you do this so nicely, and it's what I've appreciated. We're going to have you back on, because I think we've only talked about a couple things, but our guests are going to have a million questions, like to translate the science in a way that's approachable. So before we move on to energy drinks, because I want to talk about energy drinks, I want to ask you about it. So when you talk about creatine, and Lindsay knows this, I love it. I recommend it. I actually take it. My husband takes it. Our 16-year-old athlete takes it because I love it for recovery. I love it for cognition. We take, and I am not paid by them. It's one that I love because, the creatine monohydrate comes in powders and it's kind of hard to drink, if I'm honest. It doesn't taste like anything, but it's like this grainy. So we started taking the Create gummies, which are NSF. Have you tried these? They are amazing.
I'll have to try it.
And I've been watching the third-party validation to be like, are these really as good as they taste and are easy to get down? I wanted to ask your opinion on them. Have you?
I have not used them. I will be honest, I have not looked into them. I'm usually skeptical of gummies because of the amount. So we're talking, we kind of talked to this earlier, the effective dose versus serving size. So oftentimes I find in like gummies, there's only like 200 or 300 milligrams in it. And we're talking about needing grams. So you might need 5 to 10 gummies to get an effective dose. So that's one thing I always find with gummies is like, that's why I'm usually hesitant on gummies, is because in order to make them a gummy and taste good, you get a lower dose of the medicine and you oftentimes have to take more. I have not looked into that one, but I will.
I need you to research this one and give it to me so we can give it an answer to our guest, but they're massive gummies. I mean, they're pretty hard to choke down, but also it's a lot better than the powder. And I've been following some of the third-party testing, and they look like they're pretty solid. So I'm like, I would love your opinion.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll let you know.
I love this.
Okay, so let's talk energy drinks, because that's another one.
Oh my gosh. And listen, I work in a middle school. I don't know if you know that, but I've been in education. This will be my 21st year. So my life has been just dedicated to kids. And I think that speaks to why Stacy and I really have such a passion for this, because we just put the well-being of kids ahead of everything else. And it started with our own kids and us talking together, but really the whole point of SPAN is to make it a positive impact on kids. Like, we don't care what comes from this for ourselves. It's literally about helping youth athletes
be a better version
of themselves
tomorrow,
and stay healthy, and think about the big picture and how it'll help them stay healthy throughout their whole lives. And something that I see that drives me out of my mind is the consumption of energy drinks.
And vaping.
We're doing a whole podcast on vaping, but that's another thing. It's so crazy how they hide it. But what's your opinion on the energy drinks? Because every time I go down the aisle at the grocery store where they have all of these Gatorades and the Powerades and the Primes and all this, then they've got the energy ones conveniently next to that, which is so enticing for kids.
One, I think we've talked about it. It's marketing. I think marketing is very good. It's really interesting. They listened to a podcast, and I can't recall the name of it. They were talking about how energy drinks the marketing is very similar to what tobacco used to be.
Yes.
Back in the day when tobacco was kicked off, as how it was targeted at this like lifestyle. You're going to look good, you're going to feel good, and like the fun names and like how the ads present. And I think that really speaks to, like it's aimed at that age group. They're marketing first, not healthcare professionals. So they're doing their job, which is not the long-term health of our kids. But my take on energy drinks, and there is a lot of science, and you can't doubt the science behind caffeine can improve performance.
Yep.
That's there. And I won't argue with anybody about that. I will argue the caveat of the fact that is with somebody who is well fed, completely nourished, and has slept. So caffeine as a Band-Aid, not a fan. Like if you're using it as a Band-Aid because for any reason that you haven't slept well, you're under eating and you're fatigued and you're like, I need caffeine to fuel my workout or to get through the day, we need to be looking at those other foundational stuff first. If you are an athlete and you have your nutrition down, you're working with nutritionists, you know you're fueled appropriately and you're sleeping well and you strategically use caffeine, and I usually recommend it not as an energy drink, but in other sources. Usually it's as a third-party tested pre-workout that is very clean. Sometimes we'll just do coffee, super clean, or teas, and we'll use that in a much lower amount and test it and make sure that we see how the body reacts. So those are my two caveats.
Honestly, those are my favorite of choice, is to use coffee or tea, because honestly, caffeine, and to your point, Jessica, and you couldn't have said it better. I've had so much fun talking to you, is that there is great science around caffeine and its impact to performance. Yeah. But again, do you know in these supplements that you're getting not caffeine plus a bunch of other things you don't want to be getting? And so coffee and tea are a really easy way. Why do you need an expensive energy drink?
Way cheaper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know. And there's so much stuff. I think if you look at energy drinks, so obviously we know sports drinks, their goal, and I think sports drinks have a role, and I think they're very effective in sport. So they are just, water, electrolytes, and carbohydrates to replace what you lost when you participate in sport. Energy drinks have a ton of sugar, ton of caffeine, and a host of other stuff, depending on the energy drink you pick. There's all these other herbs, vitamins in there. A lot of times they're included for marketing purposes to say, because this is in there, this claim we can make, and not really be an effective dose or even the right thing because they're not third-party tested. I think energy drinks, they're just interesting to see the marketing and the science behind them, but definitely there are much better options out there. And again, the other part is, and I think many people dismiss the fact that caffeine plays a role in impacting of sleep. And it may not be for some people falling asleep. It may be the depth of sleep. So you may have poor REM sleep because you took caffeine. For some people, caffeine can take anywhere from 4 to 10 hours to actually clear out of your body. If you are a woman on birth control pills or on estrogen therapy and hormone therapy, they go through the same pathway of clearing out of your body. So it's going to take longer. So you're going to have a longer impact. So just some things to look out for, especially I think with our high school kids, they tend to drink them after school before practice. And that is still in that window to impact sleep. And then you get in this vicious cycle.
Yeah. You're talking a 10 to 12 hour clearing and they're taking it at 6 o'clock at night. And then they're wondering why they feel tired. And then the next day it repeats this vicious cycle of, I feel tired, I can't perform as well. The other thing I wanted to touch on is niacin. They pump a lot of niacin into these energy drinks. And you want to talk about cardiovascular risk in overload. So niacin has been associated with, cardiovascular impacts. So it's a scary thing. I think we don't think about a lot of what all else in these energy drinks besides caffeine.
I have had so many kids, and I was a 6th grade teacher for a long time before I became a curriculum coach. And I would have kids come in my classroom with energy drinks. Like we're talking Monsters, Red Bulls, those kinds of drinks in the morning. And they'd be drinking them. And this one student I had, he was a very, very good baseball player and he played select ball. And so every Monday morning, he would come in and he'd be drinking this. And I was like, do you have a late night? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, did you sleep? No. And here he is drinking this drink. And it was every day. So he's always tired, but then he'd have these drinks. And it killed me. So I actually did like an argumentative essay, and I brought in an article about energy drinks and just gave it as one of the options so that he could like learn about it.
Yeah.
And so then he was like, I don't know if I should be drinking all these. And I was like,
maybe you should get some sleep.
What makes you think that?
I think, there's so much behind the energy drinks in the sense of like, especially if you're talking about kids in school, their attitudes, jitters, or they become anxious. Do they become does it start? I think there was one that was showing that like, if they drink a drink a week, they were more likely to cause like fights in school. And like, there's so much other science behind energy drinks that's so negative, and that we're missing the point of like going back to sleeping skills, eating right. And
well, then it makes me wonder too, because because you see in your field the number of kids that we have that are on medication for ADHD and the number of kids that are on medication now for anxiety. So when you combine that with
caffeine,
crazy levels of caffeine, it's terrifying.
it's very terrifying. And I mean, when you start adding stimulants that are already known to cause anxiety, put anti-anxiety medications on because they're having anxiety from a stimulant, and then they're using caffeine, it is a recipe for disaster. And I think it's overlooked by so many. They're just like, let's give another medication to help with that. When in reality, we are not really looking at the root cause of, hey, it may be actually the Adderall that's causing all these other things that need to be added on. So sitting down sometimes and looking, and we may be able to change that Adderall to methylphenidate, and you tolerate that one slightly better because of the pathways that it metabolizes through in your body. But, there are things that you could sit down and talk to a pharmacist and be like, hey, are these some of the side effects that could be causing this? Instead of adding another medicine, can we change it? Can we use something else?
I love that you share that, because
I do too.
I worked in a primary care clinic where we worked as a coordinated collaborative care team. And so it was an endocrinologist, a dietitian, a physical therapist, a pharmacist, and a mental health professional. And we rounded on patients as a collective. And I cannot tell you how many times a doctor would stack on a new medication, and the pharmacist, thank goodness for what you do, Jessica, would get to come in and switch that medication or review this plethora of 10, 12 medications and knock them down to 4 or 5 and get the same effective outcome. And again, this just goes back to the importance of specialty of practice, is like the doctor's trying to do what they've learned to do, but they don't know medications the way that you do. And so
yes, I was just thinking, like, a doctor's prescribing to a problem, but the pharmacist knows the science and how the medications work together. And I don't think I've ever thought about that until this moment with
and
you.
I think there's so much more we're learning about the body. Like, there's so many nuances. I mean, for example, look at the class of like SSRIs for antidepressants. There's so many. So why does a doctor pick one over another? Have they gone to school to figure out what are all the nuances of that? And then you can look at, which you get into a whole nother realm of personalized genetics. So you could technically do a genetic test, determine how your body metabolizes medications to figure out which one might be best for you. So that's like the nuances of the field of pharmacy. But, like looking at those, there's so many different things. Like, I may choose one antidepressant for this patient. They're in a weight class sport. I am not going to put an antidepressant that is known to cause weight gain on that patient. The doctor may be like, I think that's my favorite. And I'll have a conversation and be like, listen, this is a weight class athlete. This may cause even more problems. So why can we not try this one that has less of that side effect and that risk? And usually they're like, okay, let's try that. But all these nuances of drugs within class. That's why there's so many different drugs in class.
Set them up for success.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Set them up for success and not for more depression and continuous failure.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
amazing.
And I think, again, I can't preach on this enough. It's just the importance of an interdisciplinary care team, whether it's for your young athlete, for yourself as an adult, not thinking that one doctor is going to have all the answers, because no one does. And so I think that's why second opinions, having people who are experts in the fields of what they do, is so important to actually driving.
And I think that's why I am so passionate about what we're doing here, because
you're learning.
I'm learning. I love learning, but I think that we pay so much money for private lessons for kids in sports, whether it's a pitching lesson, whether it's like private speed and strength training. Parents are paying thousands upon thousands of dollars a year. But we're not looking at the real necessity, which is, are you paying for a nutritionist for your athlete and a mind coach for your athlete?
Or even, are you giving them NSAIDs because you're not letting them rest?
Yeah.
Like, oh, your arm hurts. My son pitches, he catches. A lot of times his legs are sore. I don't give him anything because I want him to feel the level of pain he's in, so I know if there's a problem, right? Like, are you hurt or are you just sore? Sore is okay. Sore means you worked hard. But are you hurt? So I think that if I could recommend to and I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a pharmacist, but if I could recommend as a mom to any other mom listening or parent, get your kid a dietitian. Yeah. Get your kid a nutritionist. Work, really know what's best for your kid. If they're on a plethora
of medications, use a sports pharmacist
to make sure what they're taking is appropriate.
Yeah, it's appropriate. And I mean, there's little things that impact sport that people don't think about. And if you have an athlete going into another level, there's a whole different level of can you take a medicine without an exemption in the NCAA, or if you're in Team USA or Olympic development programs and you're hoping to compete for Team USA, there's a whole list of banned substances. And, that's a whole different topic, but it's the same idea of making sure you have the right medication and looking at how it impacts sport. For one person, one sport, a medication may have a positive impact. In another sport, that same medication may have a really negative impact. So, it's very, again, as we talked about nutrition, everything is very personalized. I think it really we talk about having an interdisciplinary team, but it also talks to the fact that we're everything in our body is so interconnected. It's not our gut connects to our mind, which connects to our muscles, and it's all interconnected. You can't just have one person, focusing on your gut. You're missing out on other things. Just focusing on your hormones, you're missing out on other aspects. So I think it speaks to the whole person is interconnected. You need a multidisciplinary team to help support that whole
And
person.
how amazing would that be if a kid who's in middle school that really is excelling at their sport and is passionate about it and wants to go the distance and play competitively in college? How amazing would that be if they had every year their team that they're seeing, and that their dietitian, the whole team, everybody works with them throughout the entire college experience. I mean,
we've got to get that even into D2 and D3 schools.
I know.
I feel like it's
for sure.
Even JUCO, because a lot of kids now are going and playing JUCO, and then they enter the transfer portal, and they're going to those D1. Maybe they went to JUCO to get grades up. Maybe they needed to get general classes done. Maybe they are recovering from an injury. But that transition, if they had the same team of people working with them from middle school through high school and on, we go to a pediatrician for how many years? They see him twice a year. We're missing.
Yeah. We're missing out.
I love this, Jessica. I feel like we could talk to you forever, and I'm sure our listeners will have a ton of questions, and we're going to have to get some resources to list you and your contact info on our website, because I do think a lot of our high school or collegiate athletes are taking multiple medications or multiple supplements. And I love the idea of having you just help them at a minimum review all the things they're taking and know, is this what you should be doing to promote optimal performance and optimal long-term health? And so thank you so much for being on with us today. Before I let you go, is there anything else you feel like you didn't cover that you would want to share with our athletes, our parents?
I think we covered a lot of the topics. So I think the one thing I usually try and tell, if I'm talking, I do a lot of work with high school females and college female athletes. So my space is really in female athletes, just because I feel like needs the support, needs the education. But usually what I usually end and tell most of my athletes is no matter how hard you're working, you're always enough. You don't always have to work more, sometimes less, and listening to your body. And I know it's scary, but no matter what you do, you're more than your sport, and you're enough as a person, because I feel like we don't hear that enough.
Love that. And I don't know if you know this, but given our mission, it's a faith-based business that we operate. And I think the one thing we would always want our athletes to take away is you are more than your sport. You're an amazing, unique individual. And sports is going to last so long, but your amazing self is going to have to last forever. Right. So thank you for sharing that wisdom, Jessica. I love that so much.
Stay tuned for future podcasts where we will bring on exciting guests in the sports world, highlight spotlight coaches, athletic directors, former and current collegiate and professional sports players, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and more.
What you eat and how you think can transform your athletic performance and overall well-being. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or fitness enthusiast looking to gain that mental edge and optimize your health, this podcast is for you.
Don't forget to join the SPAN community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media channels, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at @SPAN_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.